Welcome to the PM session of the Student Data Privacy Fall Training. This is the fourth annual training that we have done, and thank you for your time. We wanted to go over a few items that were a little bit more on the basic side, and we did that this morning. And this afternoon is a little more advanced, but we have recorded both sessions, and both will be disseminated through our newsletter along with a survey about these sessions. So if you missed the AM session and would like to review it, don't worry, we're going to send it to you. John has just put into the chat the subscription to this newsletter. This is our primary point of contact of how to get in touch with you and disseminate what's new and what's going on in the world of privacy. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and you'll be able to see that link of these recorded presentations. So a few housekeeping items. You're all muted for right now. We are going to allow you to unmute yourselves at the end of these presentations for question and answers. If you have questions throughout the presentations, put them in the chat, and John is going to track all of those questions and we are going to answer them at the end. John is also putting together a great Google Doc that we will share with you through the newsletter that will contain all of the links to everything we're describing. So if you see something you're interested in and you would like that link, know that it will be coming to you. And with that, I'm going to start a really quick poll. It looks like most of us identify ourselves as data managers. It looks like we have a large number of other. We'd perhaps put in the chat what that other might be. But it's not surprising that there are a variety of folks here because data privacy really does touch a number of different departments. So welcome, welcome. I am going to turn the time over to David Saleh, who will be giving both presentations, Privacy in a Time of COVID and the October 1 review. So David.
Thank you, Whitney. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Saleh. I'm a student privacy auditor at the Utah State Board of Education. And we're going to be talking about maintaining student privacy during the pandemic and certainly like the different phases of the pandemic. So let's actually start with last spring when this all started. And you might recall after schools closed, we statewide moved to some form of remote learning, online education. We immediately started getting lots of questions about, hey, what is allowed under FERPA, what is not? The U.S. Department of Education also put out a lot of information answering these questions. So for those of you who don't know PTAC, that's the Privacy Technical Assistance Center at the U.S. Department of Education. They put out a handful of resources. One of the first ones they put out was an FAQ that largely related to data sharing, what's permitted within the school community, with parents, sharing with the media, with health officials, for example. And then very quickly, it became clear that no, we weren't going to continue doing school in session. Everyone was going to go remote nationwide. And they very quickly had to put together resources related to, well, what's allowed? You know, can you have a student on camera? Are you allowed to do things like what we're doing right now, kind of a virtual meeting? And so they put together some resources that answered how that should work within FERPA. And so one is a document that gives requirements and best practices, and they also had an accompanying webinar that was very good and gave some different scenarios and examples. We took these and we wanted to answer the basic legal question, can you do this remote learning stuff? And if you weren't aware, the basic answer is yes. In most cases, you can do that sort of thing. There are some things to keep in mind. We also spoke with a number of charter schools that have been doing virtual learning for some time. Like that's actually their model. They're a virtual school. So last spring, we spoke with a number of them about, what had they learned? What were some best practices, some things to avoid? And so we took a lot of the information from PTAC and from these discussions, and we put together our own FAQ, which is available on the State Board of Education's website. We also created this video of me in my living room. That basically gives a lot of the same information. So if you haven't seen this already and you are engaging in remote learning in any form, even if it's just a small number of students, not your whole school, I would highly recommend that you view these resources. The video is pretty comprehensive and it's only about 7 minutes to watch. And I think it might have already been said, but we are going to have a document at the end of the session where anything we talk about, any resource we share, you'll be able to access in that document. So just make a note of it then if you want the links for those. Okay, that moves us into the summer. And summer came and we weren't really sure what fall was going to look like with schools. We had some ideas, we had some concerns. There was thoughts of like, well, what kind of health data will we be collecting on students to let them in the building? We looked at some privacy things with that. Our section was working on things. There were different groups at USBE working on ideas. The health department was working on ideas. And ultimately, and hopefully you've seen this before, this all culminated in one, there was the reopening requirements that the state board put together and that every LEA got and was supposed to work within that framework to create their individual reopening plan. But also the health department, if you go to coronavirus.utah.gov, one of the documents there is the COVID-19 school manual, which talks about different things schools should be doing. There is a section in there on privacy, which we didn't co-write, but they sent it to us and we looked it over and said, yep, that all sounds right. We agree. So this is another resource that came out in the summer related to schools in this pandemic. And that brings us to the fall. And that I'm aware, most of our students statewide are in person to some degree. We're aware there's, different models, they're hybrids. There's some who are spending some time online, some time in person. But that I'm aware statewide, most students are in person to some degree. And with that said, the pandemic, it's obviously changed a lot. And we're not entirely sure at this point, what we're doing well, what we could be doing better. And so instead of sharing resources with you at this point, we're going to move into most of the session actually being very participatory. We're going to have you all go into different breakout groups. So we figure there should be 8, maybe 9 in each group. And we're going to we have 6 different topics. And I'll go over those in just a second, but I just kind of want to describe the protocol here. So in a moment, a thing will pop up saying you're going to breakout room, and it'll give you the name of the breakout room. Remember what that name is because you'll be going somewhere online. In fact, John, you can feel free to share that now if you like. It's a Google slide deck of this presentation, and at the end of it, there's some places where each group will fill out the notes of their conversation. So once you get into that room, choose a scribe, or you can have multiple individuals who will write down things as you like. Go to your group slide. So there will be, again, when you get sent to that room, it'll say you're going to training and communications room 2, and then go to that slide. You'll be able to see all the slides, but just go to your slide. And once you're in, the discussion is going to follow with a SWOT format. And I'll explain what that is in just a moment. Expect the scribe to take notes throughout of your discussion. And we figure we'll give you probably about 20 minutes. We'll kind of see how it goes. If you want a little more time, I think we can offer that. But afterward, we want to come back together and kind of review some of the things that we noticed. We're not expecting each group to do a share out. I don't think we really have enough time for each group to share what they discussed. But the slide deck will be available. The notes will be available for everyone afterwards to be able to review and use in any way you feel helpful. So let me talk real quick about what I mean by SWOT analysis. So SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You can think of it as this 2x2 grid is designed. Things that are helpful or harmful. If they help you, it's either a strength or an opportunity. If they're harmful to achieving the objective, they're a weakness or a threat. The difference between those depends, are they part of your internal organization, something inherent to your LEA, or are they external? Are they something you don't necessarily have as much control over? So something that's helpful to you achieving a goal and outside of your control, that's an opportunity. Something that's harmful to achieving your goal and part of your agency, that's a weakness. So here are the topics. And these come from the Center for Democracy and Technology. They gave a presentation over the summer about protecting student privacy during the pandemic, and they identified 6 steps that they felt every school should be addressing in order to effectively teach students, protect privacy, and mitigate the risks of COVID-19. So because we're a pretty large group, each one of these topics, there will be 2 groups. So pay attention not just to the topic, but also pay attention to the number. Because it'll be either room 1 or room 2 for that topic. Let me explain real quick what these, how I understand these at least. You might have a slightly different understanding. So the first one is utilizing existing data and technology governance structures and staff. I see this very much as, using what you've already got. No need to go out and purchase a thing. It's always about purchasing a thing, a new technology, a new whatever. Not to say that you couldn't do that, but a lot of getting through this pandemic and protecting student privacy and making things work is always going to be about leveraging what you already have. So that will be one of the SWOT actually 2 of the SWOT discussions, remember? So there will be governance structures 1, there will also be governance structures 2. Second topic, providing educators with privacy training and communications. Now, under Utah law, you're also already supposed to be providing this kind of training at least annually. I imagine that the pandemic has really complicated this with your ability to provide professional development, probably also complicated your ability to, complicated the number of topics you have to discuss with so many new protocols in place to protect students, their health in the pandemic. And so this is, I think, a really important topic. It's one we're fairly familiar with. We've been talking about training for some time as a state, and I'm just curious to hear about how the pandemic has changed things. Or even another example is with shadow IT, different technologies being used, things like we're doing this on Zoom, training teachers on how to hold lessons and things and meetings with students over Zoom in a way that protects student privacy and confidentiality. I might be giving away a little bit too much things you might talk about, we'll see. Number 3, ensuring appropriate agreements are in place before using new tools and products. Again, this was not something new before the pandemic. We were having this as an issue. Has it accelerated during the pandemic? Are teachers looking more and more to use technology that requires student PII, but hasn't necessarily gotten those agreements in place? And I've already alluded to this one. We'll have 2 groups talk about number 4, video conferencing tools. I imagine we're all using these to some degree, certainly more than we were a year ago, maybe not as much as we were last March. But again, there's lots of security issues that come with video conferencing tools. 5 is one that I think is really important, creating a legal and technical data deletion plan. And if we go back to that video in my living room and some of the FAQs on remote learning that we put together, this was a best practice we recommended, particularly if you're going to record video of a student. Our FAQ basically said, yeah, you can record a student. That's not necessarily a problem under FERPA, but we highly recommend you let parents know how long are you going to hold on to that recording, what are you going to use it for, and when are you going to delete it? So we're collecting different types of data now than I think we were a year ago, certainly. Maybe certain data about students' health. And that's kind of the question. Hopefully, particularly because it seems like we're getting some good news about the future of COVID vaccines. Hopefully, in the very near future, we won't have to be operating this way. And that will mean that we'll have a bunch of data that maybe we aren't going to want anymore. It only made sense during the pandemic. So we should be thinking now about what are our plans for deleting data? What data should we hold on to? What data should we not? And then the last one is the topic of equity. And particularly in three areas, within data, within technology, and within privacy. And I've heard lots of discussion, particularly last March, on the technology side of equity, when we talk about making sure every student had a device, every student had access to the internet. I think there's an intersection between these three, though, or among these three, I should say: data, technology, and privacy. And that's what we hope to see the discussion revolve around. So again, if you, and John, go ahead if you haven't already, share the slide deck so you can see all the slides I just went over, and then you will see the different groups. So if you're in governance structures 1, you'll come here. You'll see that in the slide, the topic is already there, so you don't need to bounce back and forth in the deck. You can also see, there's a description of what each element in the SWOT says. So you'll go to that group, choose a scribe. Again, we're going to give you about 20 minutes to discuss each of these elements. At that point, we'll kind of gauge where we're at. Do we want more time to discuss? And kind of go from there. So before we go into breakout rooms, I do want to just give a quick opportunity. If anyone is extremely confused, now is the time to ask the question in the chat. Because we're about to separate and I don't want anyone to feel lost. Okay, in that case, the breakout rooms, I do still see some activity going on in some of the different rooms. That's good. I invite you to continue filling these out because, again, we hope that this can be certainly a resource for us at USB to figure out, what are the next things, the next resources that you all really need. As you were having your conversations, I was, looking at what you were writing, and just have like 2 minutes before we're supposed to go to the next presentation. So I just wanted to share, I guess, really just one thing that stood out to me was in the training and communications. Because I also saw this leak into several of the other topics as well. Certainly like the appropriate agreements one, where people were saying how, like, hey, we're trying to be on top of this, but, with the pandemic, and this company said, hey, it's free, and teachers said, okay, and then they start using it, and that there needs to be training on that. That training, I guess, is a thread through all of this. And I guess I'm just looking at the opportunities one, because that's the main one that stood out to me real quickly, was the more USB-E resources, the better. And I guess therein is my question. If you have a moment to put it in the chat, and hopefully maybe we can turn this into a larger conversation more than just the little amount of time we had allotted here. You can put it in the chat, or if you think about it throughout the day and want to email us after, that would be great. But I'm just wondering, what are the resources you need, particularly from a privacy perspective or a data security, anything within data protection? Or honestly, if there's something you feel like you need and we're not the right people, but someone at USB is, let us know, and we can forward it to that person. But I'm going to end this presentation now because it said we were going to go to 1:45, and I'm giving the next presentation anyway, so I'll just segue into that. But yeah, any additional comments or detail on anything you discussed? I hope it was a good discussion. But yeah, feel free to keep it going, share with us, email us. Ooh, and that's my timer saying that this session is now over. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the next one, which is our review of the October 1 compliance check. I assume most of you were here for the previous session when I introduced myself, but I know a couple of people have since come in. So I'll introduce myself again because I'm on my introduction slide. So hello, my name is David Soleil. I'm a student privacy auditor at the Utah State Board of Education. And I'm going to talk today about our statewide check of privacy policies and notices that we call the October 1 check. So for those of you who weren't aware, the State Board of Education, particularly the Student Data Privacy section, State law says that our job is to ensure compliance with privacy laws throughout the public education system. And within board rule, we have the scope of this specific check, which says all of the different things that we're supposed to be looking for. Now, this incidentally is not all of the things that state and federal privacy laws say you're supposed to be doing. There's a little bit of a mismatch that hopefully in the future we can resolve so we can make sure that you have all of the things in place that you need. But specifically, we've been looking at, do you have, under FERPA, you're required to have an annual notice of FERPA rights, a directory information notice. Under state law, you're required to have a data governance plan, a data collection notice. You're also required to have a metadata dictionary, which we didn't check. In a moment, I'll explain why. And also, you're supposed to adopt a cybersecurity framework. We looked a very little bit at that. A cybersecurity framework is something really big. It's not something that we can just easily, look at one piece of paper and say, oh, well, you've got this. So let me say real quick the metadata dictionary. Many of you might be aware that USB created in the data gateway a tool that could be used for your metadata dictionary. This website, unfortunately, has not been functional for quite some time. I've lost track how long this hasn't worked. And our current plan is to no longer get it up and running again. We have had a lot of success with the SDPC website. So that's the Student Data Privacy Consortium, which has a lot of similar functionality, right? It's a registry of who you're sharing data with. And so our plan is to have the state one, instead of being this data gateway one, which we've clearly had issues being able to keep functional, we're going to move all of the functionality into the SDPC website. Since that wasn't ready in time for you to do this October, we didn't check it this year, but our plan moving forward will be to check it. And also, as we start expecting this to be kind of, the state metadata dictionary, you're allowed to go on your own path if you want to do it slightly differently. But as we start moving more toward that, you can expect more guidance, more perhaps like a different training video where I go metadata dictionary. Maybe we'll do that gag again. Maybe we won't. I don't know. But the point is, expect in the coming months to be hearing more about how you can use SDPC to meet all of the requirements of the metadata dictionary. Okay, with that said, there's obviously some limitations to the way we do this check. I already pointed out not every single requirement was included in the scope, just some of the big ones under FERPA and the Student Data Protection Act. Some of them are really hard to really check just by looking at documents. The cybersecurity framework, for example, some of that will be documents. Some of it really to check, you'd have to do interviews, you'd have to go in person, you'd maybe have to do some sort of penetration testing. This is really the kind of thing that UEN, or UETN, I should say, is far better equipped than USB-E to be able to check. And I know some of you have gotten those reviews from UETN in the past. But also ultimately, we can only tell you if you have these documents. State law, for example, says you need your data governance plan and your data collection notice posted on your website. I can tell if it is posted on your website. I can't tell if you're following it. That would require us, again, to do something a little more in depth with interviews and things like that. Ultimately, what I'm getting at is, we're doing a census here. I can tell you, I looked at every single LEA. I think there's 157 this year. So we're favoring breadth over depth. So let's compare how we did this year to last year. Last year, due to a number of reasons, a lot of the numbers were kind of low on November 1st. The annual notice and directory information notice as required by FERPA, that was our first year checking those. We modified the board rule to say we need to be looking for those. Consequentially, our numbers were pretty low last year. Only about 80 some LEAs had both. But we've been working with LEAs throughout the year to make sure that those requirements are there. And again, we're pretty close. Overall, our numbers are, I think, 90% of LEAs met all of the requirements. And there's just a handful that still are missing one or two things. Similar with the data collection notice, that was the first year, 2019, that we checked for it, so the numbers were low. Most LEAs have it now. Data governance plan was incredibly low in 2019. And the reason for that was there were some changes to board rule and state law, particularly surrounding having a rule related to expungement of student records. And if you haven't updated it since you had your original data governance plan draft, that's what we're looking for, is updates to that language. So again, last year, only, just slightly under 40 of the 150 plus LEAs had that. We're much closer right now. Again, there's only a handful that still need to make just minor modifications. In fact, I'm pretty sure every LEA in the state, with the exception of maybe there's a handful of charter schools that opened that maybe don't have it just yet. I'm pretty sure everyone has a data governance plan. It's really just a question of, does it meet all of the requirements? So I feel pretty good about where we're at with those things. Now, a question we often get is one that actually relates a lot to the CIS controls. And that question is, are we allowed to share student PII over email? Well, let's look at what the law actually says. And if you weren't aware, the law doesn't say anything about sharing student PII over email, at least not directly. The Student Data Protection Act says you need to have a data governance plan, and that data governance plan needs to incorporate reasonable data industry best practices. This is defined more clearly in board rule, where it says you need to adopt a cybersecurity framework. So follow-up question then is, okay, well, what do cybersecurity frameworks say about sharing student PII over email? Well, the answer is, if we look at the CIS controls, 14.4 says you should encrypt sensitive information in transit. But unfortunately, it doesn't tell you what sensitive information is. Is it all student information? Is it some student information? So we look to another subcontrol, in this case 13.1, which says LEA should classify which information they consider to be sensitive. And actually, just to go back to the breakout discussions we had a moment ago, that was one of the things I noticed in the data destruction one was, and I think this is a very good point, before we even start talking about destroying data, we need to talk about what data we have in the first place to know if we should be destroying it or not, right? So some kind of inventory, some kind of classification to know these are ones we're going to destroy at the end of the year. These ones are sensitive. We should only share these with some form of encryption. And these ones are, and other ones that are maybe not sensitive, we can share those in the clear. So in other words, the answer to that question, because we get it a lot and it's kind of hard, the answer is basically it's up to you, but you have to do the work first. You have to classify your information. And then if you've classified it as sensitive, you got to have some way that you're keeping it safe. So we asked in our October survey, and I got a pretty decent response rate. I figured these numbers are right within about 4 percentage points either way. A little more than half of the LEAs have said that they have started some sort of data security classification. And about a third said it's done. So clearly, over the next year or two, or maybe sooner, I don't know, we're going to want to see more and more of these security classifications done in order to not just know what we can email, but also be able to handle those questions of data retention and data destruction. We asked a specific question because we thought, well, there's certain types of data that I'm sure everybody probably thinks is sensitive, and health data being one on people's minds right now with the pandemic. And remember, with these numbers, if they seem kind of low, this is for all LEAs, not just ones that have started a classification. 42% said they haven't started a classification yet. So for, around 60%, or between 50 and 60% of LEAs figure health data, behavioral data, incident or discipline data, special education data, but those would all be sensitive. And if that's the case, then you would need to make sure that these are encrypted while sharing them. I had the thought that, well, maybe, because FERPA allows for something called directory information, where you're basically saying it's harmless, you're going to share it freely. It's essentially public information. So how many LEAs are in their classification consider, basically, if it's not directory information, it's sensitive, and we should always ensure that it has some level of protection before we share it. Turns out about a quarter of LEAs said that's the case. and about a quarter said basically all student data. And admittedly, I imagine there will be some situations where it won't be encrypted, and maybe you'd want to clarify that in policy. You know, you're not going to encrypt the yearbook, for example, even though it contains PII. Presumably, it's directory information PII. But that might not mean that, you know, in other circumstances that you wouldn't want to encrypt a student's name or photograph or other things in other contexts that weren't the yearbook. So what this ultimately comes down to, one of the big questions that we get beyond just are we allowed to do this, is if we're going to do it securely, how do we do it? What options do we have available to us? And so here are some common ones that I am aware of. And it seems like a good number of LEAs are as well. So one would be using some sort of secure cloud-based sharing. This could be if you're using G Suite for Education, if you're sharing it on the Google Drive. Now, bear in mind that just because it's on the Google Drive doesn't mean it's secure, right? You can put those sharing settings to have it just be completely out in the open. Dropbox is another example of this, where you could be sharing it securely over the cloud. Secure File Transfer Protocols, or SFTP, is another option. So this would be like your WinSCP. There are several free softwares that could be used. And I'll say with these ones, SFTPs in clouds do seem to be very good for internal communication. I think it's essentially giving you an internal place that's secure. Might be more problematic if you're trying to share outside of your organization, or also if there is, you know, just a very small amount of data, like, you know, you're just talking about one student and one data element about that student. Doing that over an SFTP would probably be overkill, I would think. But those were the two most common ones that LEA said they were using. Of those that said they were using it, because again, there was a number that said that they haven't adopted any tools yet. About 44% said they had some sort of policy level restriction, something that said, you know, you may not share this over email, you may not share this over, you know, whatever sort of thing, as a way to control it. Encrypted email is another option. And if you weren't aware, those of you who are using G Suite for Education, as part of that platform, you have extra features that you would not have if you just signed up for regular Gmail. One of these is you can enable what is called SMIME, which is essentially a secure form of email. And if you haven't done that, that's worth looking into. There's also another protocol called PGP, stands for Pretty Good Privacy, is another way that could be done. We're aware that a good number of LEAs have been doing document level encryption, where let's say you have a Word document or PDF and you put a password on it. About a little fewer than a third said that's what they were doing. And then 15% said some form of de-identification, where you remove anything that would make the information identifiable before sending it, in which case you are allowed to send it in clear text. You wouldn't have to necessarily do any kind of encryption. So I'm going to have John send you a link to a Padlet. So please go to the Padlet, and we're going to do kind of a little round of sharing. So if you are using any of these technologies in your LEA, and I want you to give a little review, basically. So if you're using encrypted email, if you're using a secure cloud, put it under the appropriate header, right? Put it under that column. And tell us what it is. Tell us what you think. What are the pros? What are the cons? If it's something that you could give a hyperlink to so that others could use the resource, my hope is that this document we have right here can be something that other LEAs, if you're looking for some secure ways to share information, that you can look at this and be like, oh, okay, you know, here's an option. I could do this. So I kind of want to stop talking, and let you all have at it. But again, share what you're using, share a little review. I'll give you, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think we have about 5-ish minutes we're supposed to be allocated for this presentation for us to stay on time. So I will give you just a couple of minutes and then we'll close. All right, everyone. We're going to be wrapping up here with this session in just a moment, but I hope this has been helpful. I'm just looking over this Padlet here, and I think there's a lot of neat stuff. There's stuff I hadn't necessarily thought of. Um, it's also interesting because I see it slowly appear as you're writing it, and so I noticed like the top one on de-identification came up with Paint app, and I'm like, uh-oh, is someone using Microsoft Paint thinking that it's like some sort of secure way to store student transcripts or something like that? And then I see the rest of it as they explain it. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, you're just using it to mark stuff out of screenshots. Like I've definitely done that. I use Snagit is what we have at our office, but yeah, something like that where you can easily just yeah, scrub anything identifiable out of a document when sharing it. That's great. I hadn't thought of that as a way to do that. So again, everyone will have a link to this Padlet at the end of the presentation. If you see something there that you're like, hey, wait a second, I could be using that. How does that work? Let us know. We'll try and find out more information about it for you. Clearly, someone in the state is using whatever that is, and we can track down people who are using it and see if we can, help each other out. I think that's a good thing to do in these kinds of trainings and conferences, is learn from each other, get some ideas from each other. So I hope that has been helpful for you. I'm going to move to kind of my takeaways. So here's my action items for you. So if you noticed, again, you might remember before we started talking about security technologies, that there was a list of all kinds of documents that we expect LEAs, or federal and state law expects LEAs to have, that we don't necessarily check for October 1. So I'd like you to work with your colleagues and with USB to ensure that those policies and notices are there, even though board rule doesn't require you necessarily to check with us. Federal and state law do still expect you to have them. If you weren't aware, we have a data manager course that goes over all of those different documents. I'd recommend that you review it if you haven't seen it yet. We'll be giving you the link later. And there's also sections on cybersecurity that discuss getting started with security classifications. We have some good documentation there from NIST, which is, I think, the best documentation I'm aware of that talks about starting a classification. And then if you haven't already, remember, only about 40% said they hadn't yet. Begin that classification. It sounds like it'll be helpful not just from a security point of view, but also ultimately from like a data destruction point of view. Look at some of the technologies and tools that are available for securely sharing data. That's what was in the Padlet. I hope that you can use that in the future to get some good things in place for you. Reach out to other LEA data managers for advice on how to use those tools. And then again, one of the big things, we're going to be communicating with you via our newsletter. So most of you, I imagine, are already signed up for it. If you aren't, then we'll give you a link at the end of the block to be able to sign up for that. That's when we'll let you know any kind of updates that are going to happen with the new metadata dictionary being in the SDBC. So you'll want to look for that there. That's it for me. I'm going to pass the time over to Jess to talk about the national DPA.
Great, thank you so much. So my name is Jessica and I'm a student data privacy trainer at USBE. And I'm talking to you today about our updated DPA. So for anyone who's familiar, we do have a model document for this currently. This will be our new version launching today. So happy that you were all here to learn about it. I want to start off on when you would need to get a data privacy agreement. So specifically, Utah law requires certain privacy protections be included when entering agreements with third parties. This model agreement meets those requirements and also meets federal law. So this law is triggered when entering an agreement and also sharing PII. To address this, we came up with a two-part solution. So the first part is the DPA, which is what we will be talking about. The best part about this agreement is that it has an Exhibit E, which is a general offer of terms. Essentially, it makes this entire agreement piggybackable. So if one LEA signs this agreement with a vendor with that Exhibit E, any other LEA can subscribe by filling out one page of the agreement. This is better for everyone because it creates a lot more collaboration statewide It means that we're all pooling our resources and means less contracts each year for each LEA. The second part to this is the Student Data Privacy Consortium, or the Utah Student Privacy Alliance. This is the website that houses all of those agreements. So it has some inventory components, it's public facing in certain ways, and you can also see what vendors are agreeing to, not only in the state of Utah, but across the country. There are about 30 states that are participating in this now. With that, our new DPA is actually going to be called the Utah NDPA, or the National Data Privacy Agreement. This is not a national agreement to be signed on a national level, but it has a standard body of language. The point of this is to simplify the contracting process. So when we send them a DPA from the state of Utah, they recognize the agreement, they recognize the language. So with that being said, the body of this agreement will not be altered. It will provide that standard body of language to streamline that and be recognizable. The goal with this is to create that common language and expectations, not only within the state of Utah with our LEAs, but also across the country and through these states participating in the consortium. With the development of this national agreement and that body of language, we had vendors participating as well. So those pain points where they would come back and ask to redline agreements were addressed in this. Before we hop into the agreement, I do want to show you a quick description of what it is. So it's formatted pretty similar. There's no major changes except for some added exhibits, but essentially it will format with the same cover page. Page 2 will be new, it's options. There's all the signatories for the body of the agreement are on page 3, and then we get into the different exhibits. So if you're familiar with the DPA, you can see that A, B, C, D, and E are the same. What's new is F is data security requirements to be completed by the vendor. G is supplemental state terms, and H is additional terms or modifications by the vendor. So anything the vendor suggests will not be changed within the body of the agreement. It would be listed on one page. So let's get into the agreement. All right. So with this agreement, this is the cover page. We have created it in such that it is fillable. So you can select the type of the agreement. You would put in your LEA name here. And rather than having to put your name in multiple spots, it'll populate in any other place that your LEA name should be. So you just put that in once. Now this page is new. This is the options page. So essentially, if you're reviewing an agreement and you want to know if they have redlined anything or wanted to add anything, it would be clicked here saying the vendor has added modifications. And they will also select if they have signed Exhibit E. So you can see that from page 1. Page 3 has designated representative for the agreement for vendor and LEA, and it also has the signatures. So if you're familiar with the previous version, this was separated within the agreement. We made it so it's on the same page, so we're not missing any sections moving forward. Getting into this page, this is the standard body of the agreement. This will not be altered. What's great about this being used nationally is that there is an audit clause in this agreement. And so vendors will expect that from all the other states participating as well. So it won't be unique to Utah, which is very helpful for that pushback. The vendor will provide a description of services on Exhibit A. They will let you know all data collected while using their resource. And this matches up with metadata dictionary components. Exhibit C is definitions. Now D is a directive for disposition of data. So this is not something that would be completed when originating or subscribing. This is essentially a model document that could be used for future use if you wanted to provide this directive. So this won't be signed and is explained further in the agreement if you'd like to read that through. Again, everything that we're going over, we will link afterwards. So if you're rushing to try to, write down what this is, we will send it out afterwards, and this will be published on our SDPC page today. Now, Exhibit E has been reformatted as well. So you can see this will populate the originating LEA name and the date The email to send Exhibit E, so let's say someone originates and another LEA wants to subscribe. When they're subscribing, they will send that email, send this page to a vendor in an email, and that email address will be provided directly on that page here. If you're the first one to complete this agreement with a vendor, you don't have to do any of the exhibits. You would just do the few option pages and signatory, and the vendor will fill out everything else. Now, if you are subscribing, you would only focus on this page. This would be completed and sent to the vendor. What's great about the website that we have partnered with is that you can subscribe with the click of a button. So if you see that someone has signed an agreement with an Exhibit E with a vendor that you would like to subscribe onto, you can click Create Exhibit E and it will fill in your information, email it to the vendor, and upload your page as subscribing, linked to the original agreement. So we will include the email if you haven't been onboarded and want to participate in this. All you have to do is listen to me walk you through the website, so it's pretty easy. Exhibit F is new. This is data security requirements, and this will be completed by the vendor. Exhibit G is supplemental for state terms. So rather than each state having their own agreement, their additions will be added here. So let's say like California, where they have additional laws on this topic, those would be cited here rather than changed in the body of the agreement. You can see that we are very fortunate and we've checked, and everything that's covered by state law and needs to be in there is already included. So we don't have any supplemental terms. That makes it really easy as we move forward as the consortium and work with vendors. And lastly, Exhibit H is for vendors. So if they would like to make any changes, if you see that they need to make some changes with data breach notification time, they would put anything here so you can find all of their changes and suggested language in the same place. So hopefully, I'm excited about this, and I think that this will really streamline the process and make it much easier for everyone moving forward, and it makes the language common across the consortium, so vendors are not coming back trying to clarify. And with that, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and John will be sharing those now.
Hi, we have a question from Paul. Do we need to convert all of our info over to the SDPC site? And if so, how long will the metadata dictionary be viewable?
I believe I'll take this. So with the second one, I believe your question is partly related to the data gateway data dictionary, how long that will be viewable. I am not sure on the answer to that question. Again, we're going to be working out a lot of these details. So I don't have an answer really to the first question either, other than I know that we want to make your lives easy. And so we'll have to work out any kind of portability issues of getting the information out of one if you want to migrate it over to the other. In the meantime, so that's kind of my answer to one, is that's something we need to work out. And that's, like I said, we have issues we'll be working out, and let us know your concerns, obviously, because we want to address them. And then with how long the other one will be viewable, I don't know at this moment. I just know that we have, obviously, for months on end, been working to try and get it functional again, and have not been successful at that, unfortunately. And so it's still obviously there. The big problem is it's impossible to put new information in, which really limits its usefulness, I would say. So minimally, I know right now I could get you a CSV that contains all of the information that's in there, and that would be an easy thing to just shoot over to you and say, oh, there it is, have at it. Let's see, I see a related question from Dale here while we're talking about it. Is the SDPC metadata publicly viewable, as was the intent for the data gateway, for patron review of data usage? I'm actually gonna pass this one to Jess.
Thank you. Yes, so the feature that will show everything that's publicly viewable is under customized resource listing. So you do have to copy that link that will be specific to everything you put in your website and share that out. So that would be something that you have to opt into using rather than having the SDPC registry of agreements, if that makes sense. So it's an additional step, but it's a lot more user friendly. And also to address Paul's, there is a bulk upload tool available for STPC through a CVS file or CSV file. So that is something that's available.
Yeah, and hopefully, and again, like I said, that's a detail we'll have to work out. My hope would be that I could export it out of the data gateway in the format that would be the STPC import. We want to make it as little work as possible for you because it was our tool and it didn't work. It worked a little bit. It doesn't work anymore. I'm going to go ahead and take Mark's question as well, since that seemed to be under my discussion as well. And it's really just kind of a point related to encryption, less of a question, but it's one we wanted to highlight in case you missed it. We've seen people who encrypt a file and then include the password to it in the same email. Seems fishy to me. Yeah, it seems fishy to me too. This is one of the big problems with encryption, obviously, is or any kind of cryptography is very easy to encrypt a message. Then you've got to get it to its intended recipient in a way that they can decrypt it. And it's, obviously been a problem in world wars, for example, getting messages across enemy lines without having them be decoded. And I think just regular people now experience it just trying to communicate with each other for work. This is one of my big concerns, though, with document level encryption, is because there's no way around it. Is you're generating a password and then that person you're giving it to has to know the password. And so then you need an encrypted way to give them the password, and then it just never ends. So no encryption technology, unfortunately, is really perfect, but some are a little more seamless than others. Some are a little less clunky. I would, Suzanne points out, the password could be sent in a separate email. Sure, you could give them the password over the phone as well. Mark asks, I think it would be better over the phone personally than an email, because again, if someone broke into your email server, they'd be able to access multiple emails. They'd be able to find the next one potentially that has the password. But this is why I think using different, particularly depending on who you're communicating it with, I think internally using something like SMIME, or something like an SFTP, or your drives, like your Google Drive, would be a far simpler way to handle things. But again, my hope is that we can continue having this discussion, get everyone feeling confident, get everyone the technology they need to keep stuff secure. There's lots of free options that are available, so you don't necessarily have to break the bank. But it's more just like, if you know something that works, I want us to share that out. I want people to know about it so they can use it too.
As you can see here, we have Wendy's question: will there be a more in-depth training for the NDPA? And Jessica responded in the chat. Yes, we will. We can set up times for any of you who would like to go over that, and just email right here. Have we gone over all of the questions?
We still have one.
I do want to add really quickly about the NDPA. If anyone has follow-up questions, feel free to email any of us and we can kind of set that up if you don't have the right point of contact or remember everyone's email. John will send this link out again, and so you can access that. But essentially this NDPA, although it says national DPA, will function the exact same capacity as the existing agreement. It's just formatted a little different. But happy to schedule a quick call and walk you through any other components.
Yeah, and I just wanted to speak with that toward the third question there from Cody, which is, I assume you're quoting some language in the NDPA where it says something about, like, all data collected or something along those lines. I'll just say, because I know I looked it over. I looked over the NDPA and felt like it coincided pretty well with Utah law. I'm just one person, and I might have missed something. I might be wrong. I would recommend, if you feel like there's something in the NDPA that doesn't work, certainly to the level where if you think it's violating Utah code, that's a problem. And Jess did point out that there is one of those amendments to it, which is where it's kind of our state level things. We currently have that blank where you don't have to use it. I know other states have said, no, we're going to need to add some additional things. We're going to need to change some language to make it good with our state law. If you think there's something that needs to be amended, we do have a way that we can do that without interrupting the main body. But I would say, just let us know what your concerns are.
Absolutely. And to add on that, I do want to include that we shared this with our Assistant Attorney General at our office, just to make sure that it met everything in Utah as well as federal requirements. So we were understanding it correctly. So it did go through a thorough review process. But again, we rely on all of you to make sure that this is suiting your needs and is helpful to you. So please reach out if you have feedback or any questions or anything that you see, like David said.
You can contact us here on this closing document that I've linked again in the chat that all of you will be able to have access to, and all of the hyperlinks will work for you. Here's our contact information. Here's our website. Each one of us has our individualized contact information. Here are your colleagues or the folks that you've been spending your afternoon with. If you'd like to reflect on everybody else who is in this field, David has included his slide deck, and we have all of the different resources available for you. Again, here is the link to the NDPA, which is being released today. Other action items to remind you of, requesting an onboarding, and then other resources that our team has developed. Education Records Officer Certification, the record retention schedule that was developed last April for all educational entities, and look this December for David to star in his first animated feature as Agent FERPA as we discuss security for teachers.
Thank you, John, and thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate the time. As mentioned before, we've recorded this and we will be sending it out via our newsletter. I'm gonna let you out a little early. If you have any questions or comments, we really listen to them. We create materials and resources on your behalf. So please reach out to us if you need anything, and have a lovely day.